with Dr. Amar Dhall. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good morning.
Yeah, I know. The other side of the world is
there is a tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh man, we're even on different days. I didn't think about that. That's kind of exciting.
It is. It's trippy.
We're in the future. Okay. I really enjoyed your interview and what you had to say. I shared it with some of my friends who are not lawyers, but who are therapists or in academia and focus in parts on a lot of what you were bringing up about what it is to be human and the interconnectedness that we need to have, as well as thoughts on trauma and brains and how we work within ourselves and with others with that. So I'm hoping that they'll enjoy listening to that. I have to say, when I was putting the website together and reading about everybody, the fact that you had DJ on your credential list was exciting to me. I'm a musician as well, so it's I like seeing other creative people in positions like yours, but I also kind of wonder too if people who are in the integrative law movement are slightly more pulled together with themselves in integrating what they like as well as what they do. And that I wonder if we have more musicians than other sectors of the profession.
That's a good question. What do you reckon, Kim? Do you have any data on that?
I don't have data. I have people, anecdotal evidence that we are really a multidimensional community. That most integrative lawyers are interested in being whole people, and so they are painters and musicians and those sorts of things, in addition to anything else that they are in the law. I mean, we have energy healers and there's an energy healer who was in on the Wall Street Journal. And they actually wrote a positive article about him because he's also a bankruptcy lawyer who gets $1,000 an hour. And the Wall Street Journal could somehow hold the space because he makes $1,000 an hour and he's an energy healer. Then that could be okay, in their world. And lots of people, Glenn Meyer is an example that comes to mind. Actually found this movement through music, like starting to expand who he was to include that part of him, had him say, well, there must be other lawyers. So I think there are multidimensional people who are lawyers as a bigger part of the population of integrative lawyers. My thinking.
That's cool. Well, I guess it depends whether someone really defines themselves by being a lawyer or enriches themselves by being a lawyer, and what that means then for someone who chooses to look at themselves a bit more holistically and wear that in the world. Because I think that's also important to challenge the rigidity, perhaps, for want of a better word, with which the profession is perceived and represents itself. So it's interesting. It's good to hear. It's good to hear that it's a broad church.
I have a question. You have mentioned a couple of times in my presence, I think one of them was on the podcast, where people get confused between their trauma adaptive behaviors and their personality. That they think that those trauma adaptive behaviors are their personality. And I would love for
Mm.
you to talk a bit about that.
Well, it's an interesting one. I think it has different connotations depending where someone is in the stage of life, where they find themselves. So I think it's the case, particularly with either when people are young and they're being shaped by their environment, by their family of origin or their caregivers, whoever that may be, and things happen. The young humans learn to survive and adapt their behaviors, shape their personalities. One of the big levers is an adult coming with anger. And fairly early on, children learn that anger and pain get tethered together kind of experientially through interactions with angry adults, because it's angry adults that cause children pain. And there's an automatic desire to shape behavior, when adults come in. And this is to say nothing then of more traditional trauma. This is just the shaping of a personality, and the way human beings kind of get, for want of a better word, domesticated, from being born as the wild little creatures that we are. And in that process, people begin to create what then layers up to be a personality. And many of those responses or facets of being that get labeled personality will tend to be those adaptations to either angry adults kind of shaping behavior. And then of course there's actual out and out traumatic events like divorces or, myriad experiences that humans encounter on their journey from birth to adulthood. Then if we were to fast forward later, so I guess what I'm saying there is that there's a base foundation that everyone would have by virtue of being human, where there are many parts of the personality that are shaped like that. Then moving into adulthood, there'll be, these big events after which people could say, well, I wasn't the same after that. There was this car accident. And with something like car accident, for example, that's an impact trauma, there it can be more geared around fight or flight energy that gets trapped in the body. So more somatic kind of changing of someone's internal life that then expresses in personality as well. So I think in that regard, it's also, if I was going to make just another sort of concluding point on that, part of the challenge, and I don't want to make this sound too esoteric because it really isn't, but this is supported by science, but there isn't really a part of the brain that's yet been identified as the I center, the me part. It seems like there's this principle of emergence that occurs from many different aspects of self that creates a sense of who I am. And so, in that process of shaping myself to be, I'm Amar, you're Kim, there's Beth, there's nothing physical really about it beyond our bodies. And it's certainly, me as a person, I'm not captured by the physical processes in my brain. So there's lots of experiential or aspects of consciousness that get woven into that process, many of which may have been shaped by the experience of trauma in my body as I experience it in the moment. So hopefully that's not too esoteric, but it's definitely multi-causal. Does that give you what you're kind of looking for, ish?
Ish.
Well, it makes, talking of trauma, I have notes as I was listening. I wrote down so many things that I was like, oh, this ties into this and this ties into this. But I like the total holisticness that you talked about things, and that you did it again. Like, we start as kids and we develop in one way, and then as we go throughout life, there is different effect. And I'm wondering, sorry, my brain goes in a lot of different ways at once. One of the things that was interesting from early life, you were talking about moving from a dominion-based power to a consent-based culture, but also with that boundaries create freedom. And that made me think a lot about we're seeing similar concepts in how people parent and manage their families. And so that even as working with kids now, there's this more idea of that it's no longer just a authoritarian family, but that it's, if you give the kids power and let them consent to things, good things happen, but you also have to hold those boundaries and figure out that line. And I feel like that skill travels through life with us. And you also mentioned having lawyers become trauma-informed professionals, that there's a difference between being trauma-informed and being able to actually help someone in their trauma. So being trauma-informed to prevent causing more trauma, as well separately from being someone who would actually be helping them with it. And it made me think of collaborative law here in the US is group practice that is used primarily in family law and some in business law, where you have your attorney, but you also have mental health professionals and parent coaches and finance professionals all working together to help these people solve their problem together. And I wonder how that concept could be more, could be integrated somehow with both trauma-informed professionals and trauma professionals.
I think if we just take a step back, you were talking about ways of relating, in a family, and I think, and then boundaries kind of coming from that. I reckon one of the areas it's interesting, and I don't have it as a complete thought, but if I was to think of one of the functions of law is to act as an organizing principle for relationships. And what interests me, or what I think is it's not just what interests me, I think it's an intriguing question to see how collective sort of norms, legal norms, and the aspect of them that is an organizing or has an organizing function on society could be shaped by having more of a consent sort of paradigm, and that's not to be sort of, it's not as coarse grained as saying, oh, it's opt-in, that laws in society are opt-in, but there's something, there's something at the heart. It's not a completely formed thought in my head, but I think there's something to be said for seeing what works for us in families or individuals where, as I said, for example, consent-based culture as opposed to power over, and seeing how that can influence some of the wider aspects of law, the social, cultural, political aspects. And I think that's part of that can come in at, through the point you were making at the end, where someone can be held by a number of different professionals, each bringing their own lens, which can soften the authoritarian aspect of law that exists. Because, as you were talking, what I was kind of seeing juxtaposed was sort of authoritarian sort of styles of parenting and how that would relate to government, what an authoritarian government is, and similarly, softer, more empowered ways of parenting and how that could be analogous. But then, it's a throwaway comment to think, well, a paternalistic state is not desirable either. So, I think teasing apart some of the nuance so that some of these words that are getting used in discourse get explored, qualitatively, and seeing, what there is that can kind of be played with there. But certainly collaborative law, I think, is it's useful for people to soften, their experience of whatever it is that they're going through and needing legal recourse to, or to gain it. The other thing, which is also, I think, really important for law in terms of looking at collaboration widely. I was working with a client, I was interviewing a client for a book that I'm writing, and he was working in the police force, and he said, if I was going to encapsulate his experience, or he said, if I'm going to encapsulate my experience, he said, I didn't realize how crazy I was until I left the asylum. And what he meant by that was saying, when he was relating with other police officers in that field, they had a shared value set, and they had then communal blind spots. And it was only by getting out of that environment that he was able to actually see, oh my goodness, these are the assumptions we make. These are the toxic behaviors that we had that I didn't even know I had. So I think it would be useful, it would behoove lawyers to kind of engage in that same sort of, let's get out of the paradigm, and of lawyers meeting with lawyers and solving legal problems, legalistically with other lawyers exclusively, to kind of adopt that more holistic approach and soften the view. So yeah, that's kind of what was alive for me as I was hearing you speak there, Beth.
I'm really thinking about, I actually also say this, but when you said it, I heard it differently, around law as a organizing system for relationships. And it occurs to me that in our relationships, there are certain dysfunctional patterns that are common, and that many of those have come into the system. So the one that comes to mind is the drama triangle. Our whole system is designed on the drama triangle. So I wonder if you can say, just talk about that. What, like, not like you are an expert on this, but you do cross many disciplines.
I do have a drama triangle course that I've been working on for a while, because it is such a juicy aspect. There's research I've seen by Weinhold and Weinhold on the drama triangle that says, what they've found is that 2/3 to 3/4 of interactions out in the world are on that drama triangle. And that to me is huge. But I think once developing a lens to really see or get a sense of what it looks like when it's operating, there is, it's in films, it is everywhere, really. It's ubiquitous. It's in song lyrics. Mm-hmm. The idea of it being in law, I think it even goes back to the idea in common law of at its most basic, having lawyers evolving from trial by combat, where there is a champion, arguably in that there's a rescue by the champion of the person in conflict. So I think in that regard, it's a huge thing. And I also do think if people were supported to really adopt self-responsible attitude, because the thing with the drama triangle is, at essence, it seems like a bona fide interaction on the surface, but underneath it's actually discharging unspoken emotion, and really trying to gain power. I think there's several dimensions of this that are appropriate for not only lawyers but people going through legal process. I've got someone who I advise, as a friend, who's in the legally correct position and going through, due process with law, has such an effect on his character and psyche that he's actually losing. He's losing as a person. It's spending time, and so he's at this place where he's looking at it and going, is this even something, worth pursuing? And then there's this huge deflation, this loss of power that comes from that, which can very easily then inflame the persecutor to make this person go after the people that he's in the legally correct position for all the more. So I think, the clients of people going through legal process would benefit so much from actually having some touch point in themselves to see whether they're on this drama triangle, and if they are, if someone was to actually engage with their real needs and actually speak to the person underneath, support them to see that, whether or not they'd actually still need access to legal recourse. I think we'd be a healthier species, and I think that legal process is a magnet for the drama triangle from its inception through to how people feel going through it. So I think it's a great question, Kim.
Yeah, it's one that I've been inquiring for a while. That when I feel like I'm caught in something, I can step back and see, oh, I recognize that. There's a certain feel to it, but it seems so logical when you're in it. And like the whole idea of you have a prosecutor and you have a victim and you have the judge who's going to, say one of these people is correct, or, you get to be right. And then the person who is the, persecutor / prosecutor feels like they haven't been heard. They have been attacked by the other side because they're not always winning, and then the judge is has compassion fatigue and becomes a victim of the system. The whole thing is I think a systemic expression of the individual dysfunction.
Yeah, I think just to maybe even amplify what you've said, and this ties into the point that I made earlier, that at a young age, lots of children get anger and pain tethered together through the experience. Angry adults cause pain, to children. That's often the way it goes. There's a couple of sort of ripples of that. One is, if you look at that from a very early age, there's some drama triangle dynamics being caught there, because the go-to place for a child is, this is being done to me. They don't have power. Like the power imbalance between adult and child is in every domain conceivable. So I think the training ground for this way of being is woven into the way children are raised. Then as a secondary effect that happens often is that, because anger and pain kind of get tethered, this is at the level of sort of object relations. So what things are and how they get connected in our minds as we function. This then leads, or can lead often to, in later life, a fear of expressing anger, because it is this emotion that is kind of, it's caused pain, from when we're little to as we become adults, which then, if it's feared, it's expressed less, which means then it leaks out more in that perpetrator. I've lost my power. That's where it comes out. Anger then gets harnessed more as a vehicle to enliven expression, as opposed to someone being able to speak their truth and discharge the emotion from a place of agency. But, as you said, Kim, when I'm actually on the triangle myself, it feels natural on one level, but the more I do this work, there's that rock in the shoe that says, I know exactly where I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say something. Yeah.
I'm an Enneagram 8. And
right on.
and I've been learning about being an Enneagram 8 in the drama triangle lately, because the Enneagram 8 really doesn't want to be in the victim perspective. And but if there is somebody else who wants to play, an Enneagram 8 is a really good target to be accused of being a persecutor. And so anyway, it's a fascinating conversation for me. Thank you. I hope anybody who's listening to this actually has as much interest in the drama triangle as you and I do.
Oh yeah. I think it's a game. I actually really do think that if they don't and they haven't heard of it, it's definitely worth a look, because it's a real cornerstone, I think, to understand what it is. I think, like I said, there's the dynamics are kind of molded from just by birth and raising us to be adults. And so I think, yeah, I love how consent culture your observation was there, but I think people should do it because it's awesome. But
I actually had never heard of that concept of the drama triangle until your interview. So this has been really interesting for me to see how systemically everything works together. One thing I was thinking while you were talking was that it's encouraging to me that there are already lenses and approaches in place where I think people are trying to interrupt that in a good way. Concepts like procedural justice that more people are starting to embrace, where if you let people have a say, then you get better outcomes for everyone. And I feel like that's kind of taking away that savior part as well as the persecutor part, because if you are involved, you're raising your power level and you're also taking your agency. And that procedural justice and those concepts in particular, I have seen the most common across a lot of different disciplines. But this whole idea of trying to change everything, I did have one question, if we have time for it, that talks about transforming law firms, because I feel like that is a really entrenched piece of struggle for a lot of attorneys, is that power dynamic in law firms and the culture that is then encouraged, that you move, law school moves you from intrinsic to extrinsic values. You then move professionally into these hierarchical firms. And that is kind of I feel like a big kink in the cogs. So how do we incentivize law firms to change their cultures? Because pragmatically, unless we make it very attractive, I don't know that there's incentive for that to happen. But if we have data saying, look, you're going to get paid more frequently and have to deal with debt collection less, or you are going to win more cases, what do you think we could do to help start that shift at that level?
Well, I think the data's already there, but it's not gaining the traction that it could. Rhonda Muir wrote a book on emotional intelligence for lawyers a couple of years back. It's a good read. And in that, she makes the case very plainly that emotional intelligence brings better results in every domain, from financial performance to professional performance. You know, and I'll just notice there that I made a jump and sort of want to make it explicit, which is to do the kind of, to make the kind of shift that you're talking about, is to increase emotional intelligence. And I think that part of the issue is that the way of being that people operate with is quite seductive. So, you know, Kim and I were talking just a couple of minutes back about the drama triangle. It's an extremely seductive way of functioning, because it's normalized, it's familiar, it's not hard. You know, to sort of engage in a labor of self-development is hard work. I think the way separate law firms from any other, you know, skill-based small business, I think it's useful as a lens. Like, yes, it's a technical skill, but at the end of the day, there's also a service that's provided for a fee. And in that regard, people who are in that position are in this constant movement. And I mean, when I say movement, I mean, it's this, you know, you talked about intrinsic to extrinsic, we could use internal to external, but this movement between doing and being, you know, and the doing is lawyering, but underneath it, there's a being. And I think for the being, that owns a practice or a small business to get clear, I think, to be clear in their values, to understand how values alignment will actually support them to deliver all the things that you were talking about earlier, Beth, in the framing of the question, which is someone whose values aligned is going to find it easier to work with what I call effortless effort, because they're doing what actually is aligned for them as a person. When they're in that place, then it's easy to become excellent at it as opposed to adequate at it. From a place of excellence, then it's possible to make more money. There's greater fulfillment because it is something that I enjoy doing, and people are going to, I think that there's enough magnetism that intrinsically exists in someone that is actually being who they are. Authenticity is magnetic, I think, for humans. And so I think lawyers having the courage to kind of be more of who they are, as I said, it goes right back to the beginning, not to define themselves by being a lawyer, but to enrich themselves by being a lawyer, and to be able to have human moments with people is going to serve them financially as well as in themselves, getting around some, one aspect of law, which is sort of around the 7 to 10 years, lots of people leave. So to actually give the career longevity, I think that these sorts of changes are the way to do it, if not the only way, sort of a part of a significant step in that direction.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that's about the time that we have, unless there is anything else that.
Now, I'm going to go spend a lot of time with Amar someday when I can travel again.
That'd be cool.
I like,
there's a spare bedroom here. You can come and hang out.
I enjoy your company, and I enjoy your thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much for talking with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.